Welcome to episode 19 of the Goldenberg Destiny Project. In the previous episode, we spoke about the rivalry between Yosef and his brothers, and how in the end they sold him into slavery to a caravan of Yishmaelim who were going down to Egypt. Okay, so now we will pick up the story from that point a little in brief. It's all in the Chumash and the Torah. Things did not turn out the way they expected, that selling them into slavery would eliminate them, eliminate him from their lives. It actually turned out the opposite, that he was sold to a high Egyptian official, and one thing led to another without going into all the details. He ended up being the viceroy of Egypt and basically the effective ruler of the whole land. Then, after a few years later, there was a famine and in the whole region, and Egypt had storehouses full of grain, and everybody from the whole region had to come down to Egypt and buy food. And Yosef's brothers came down, and there was a confrontation and eventually a reconciliation. And Yosef invited them that the whole family should come down to Egypt, and they should settle in the land of Goshen in the Delta. At the time, the Jewish people were still very small. The period of the Avos, of the patriarchs, where they were just building the trunk, that had come to an end. They were ready for it to flower and to branch out and to build population, not just one on one. And the population was starting to grow. But the family that came down to Egypt numbered, between men and women, about 150 people. And there was not really a nation. There was not even a clan. It was basically like an extended family, which it was. But once they settled in Goshen, and they had favorable conditions, especially because they were the family of Yosef, who was the viceroy, then the population exploded, and they ended up having numerous people until Egypt became alarmed. Here you have a nation within their own borders, came down as a family, but now all of a sudden they're like a big nation numbering hundreds of thousands of people, and maybe they're going to want to take over the country and expel the natives. It's possible that the Egyptians were xenophobic because, according to Egyptian records, about 100 years before the bondage in Egypt, there was an invasion of Hyksos. Hyksos, like a Greek word which means invaders or something, from Semitic people who invaded Egypt, and they conquered it, and they actually ruled it for a short while and they were despotic. They tyrannized the people, and they revolted and expelled them. So maybe because of that experience, they were more wary of people that were non-Egyptian. But the Jewish people in Egypt gave them no cause for alarm, but they were alarmed anyway. So they decided to enslave them. And by gradual processes, they enslaved them, which means, what does it mean they enslaved them? They didn't put them in concentration camps. They didn't put them in slave barracks. They lived in tiny huts in neighborhoods there were other Egyptians, lower class neighborhoods. Of course, you see later that when they left, they borrowed valuables from their neighbors. Apparently, they had Egyptian neighbors that they had some. So but their slavery consisted of their having the obligation of forced labor. They had to labor for the crown, for the government. They built whatever they used to build, cities, Pisa and Ramses, and they had no choice. They had to build those, and they built those and they were compensated very, very meagerly. So they were extremely poor. They had no freedom, no liberty, and they lived in very, very abject conditions. And that was the bondage in Egypt, and it's described in the Torah. There's also a record of the bondage in archaeological sources. There is a record on the Merneptah stele. I explain it in this book, Hesterville, the Hesterville Bible Trial, which is, you can get it on my website, RabbiReinman.com, and on page 467 to 472, I explain how the archaeological record confirms that there actually was a bondage in Egypt. So, the purpose of the bondage, it has a twofold purpose. It was all preparation for the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. That is the crucial event in the history of the world, the greatest event ever in the history of the world. All of history devolves from the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. The entire Western world, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, everything traces back to that stand at Mount Sinai where God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, where he formed a covenant with them that they would accept his Torah and he would take them as his chosen people. And we will talk about this more in a future episode. But that was the greatest event in the history of the world. And the bondage in Egypt and the Exodus were a preparation for that event. How were they a preparation? In two ways. First of all, that event was a spectacular event. The entire nation had a prophetic experience. They had an encounter with God. And that is something that it was critical that we remember it. The only way we know something is true is from collective memory, as we spoke about in episode 5. And in order to have a collective memory of, what's going to happen if 1,000 years later people are going to say, no, it didn't happen, it's a myth, people had a prophetic experience. So somehow this experience had to be etched into the collective memory. And the way that God chose to do it is by instituting an age of revelation leading up to that experience, where there were numerous spectacular miracles, things that had never been seen before and never been seen after, and these implanted them so much. And it's difficult to implant a collective memory of a prophetic experience, because how do you remember a prophetic experience from the experience itself? But you could remember it of everything around it and what led up to it and what came after it. All those things can be remembered, and in that context you know that there was a prophetic experience. So the Exodus from Egypt was things that people can remember. People can remember that there were plagues. They can remember that there was a splitting of the sea. They can remember that there were difficult conditions and there were taskmasters. The experience of bondage in Egypt can be remembered. And to make it even more memorable, God made that there should be numerous spectacular miracles, and those would etch it into the collective memory. However, in order to do that, the Jewish people were in Egypt for 210 years. In the beginning, they were not enslaved. When the original people came down, they were not enslaved. But after Yosef died, and after the Shvatim died, Yaakov died, after that whole generation passed, then the enslavement began. They were in bondage for 80 years. 80 years is a long time to be in bondage, a very long time. And in order to have the spectacular miracles of the Exodus to extricate them from bondage, maybe 80 years was necessary. Maybe 20 would have been enough. 80 years probably makes it worse, but that was maybe not necessary to have so much. But there was another reason for the bondage, that it had to be 80 years, because the Jewish people themselves had to be prepared for receiving the Torah. When they came to Mount Sinai, if they had come, we spoke about this earlier in episode 11 or 10, not sure. But when we came to Mount Sinai, if they would have come as people with status and liberty and accomplishments and professions, there would have been a barrier between the Torah and the Jewish people. Had to merge. It had to become one. Yisrael v'Raisa v'Kudsha Brichu, the Jewish people and the Torah are one. They're fused together. And in order to be fused together, they need to be that there are no chatzitzas, no interruptions. And if they had come with personal garments of status, of professions, of self-respect, of self-esteem, if they had come with all these things, of ego, if they had come like that, then all those things would have interfered with the perfect welding of the Jewish people and the Torah. So therefore, the bondage in Egypt, the long bondage, reduced them to raw human beings. It stripped away all their layers. They were slaves. They had no dignity, no liberty, no status, no money, no possessions. They had nothing. And they came to Mount Sinai as raw people, and the Torah was given to them. They welded together as one, and that remains for all time, all generations. Jewish people and the Torah are welded together because the original connection was unobstructed. The deterioration of the Jewish people actually went further. And this is what I would like to discuss now. The Torah says that when God told Moshe to go down to Egypt and to redeem the Jewish people and take them out of bondage, he told him, this is what God said, "Go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord God, the Lord of your ancestors, appeared to me, the Lord of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I have surely remembered you, pakoid pakadati eschem," which means I have surely remembered you. And then it goes on, and then he says like this, "I will bring you forth from your suffering in Egypt, and they will listen to you, v'shamu l'keilecha, and they will listen to you. Then you and the elders of Israel shall come to the king of Egypt and say to him, God came upon us, and now please let us go." And then it goes on, and that's like this, "But I know the king of Egypt will not let you go." And then a little more, "And I shall stretch out my hand and strike Egypt, and then he will let you go. And when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. Let each woman borrow from her neighbor," which we mentioned before, that they had neighbors, "from her neighbor's silver objects, and you will drain Egypt." End quote. This is what God said to Moshe. Now, Pakoi Pakadati were code words that when the elders, the Jewish elders, knew that when the Redeemer comes, he's going to use these words. This they knew by tradition from Yaakov and from Yosef, and this was a closely held secret because it wasn't common knowledge. If everybody knew this, then anybody could come forward and say, "I'm the Redeemer." No, it couldn't be. It was held closely by the elders, and when they knew that when somebody comes and says that he's a messenger of God, and God said, "Pakot pakadati," I will remember you, then you know that he is genuine and he is not an imposter. So God said that you will come and you will say, "Pakot pakadati," and they will listen to you. V'shamu elecha. What does Moshe say? What is his response? Okay, I'll read to you his response. And Moshe responded and said, but they will not believe me, and they will not listen to me, for they will say, God has not appeared to you. Lo nira elecha Hashem. God has not appeared to you. The commenters are extremely amazed by this. God told him, they will listen to you. He assured him, this is God talking, and he assured him that they will listen to you. Why does he say, they will not believe me, they will not listen to me? I don't even know how to formulate this question. It's just amazing that he would say such a thing. And also, he said two things. They will not believe me, and they will not listen to me. What are the two things? They won't believe me, they won't listen to me. What are these things? So in order to explain this, now, I'm not a Kabbalist, and I'm not an expert in Kabbalah, but there's certain things that the Kabbalists say that are common knowledge. And this is common knowledge, that there are Mem Tes Shari Tumah, and there are 50 Shari Tumah, 50 gates of defilement. And the Jewish people in Mitzrayim sank to the 49th gate of defilement. They went to Mem Tes Shari Tumah. They did not sink to the 50th. And they say that if they had sunk to the 50th, they would have been beyond redemption. But they did not. They only sank to the 49th. Now, I'm sure the Kabbalists have many esoteric, mystical explanations for all these levels, but I just want to give a simpler explanation, which I don't think conflicts with what they would say. But what does this mean? In earlier episodes, we spoke about the origins of paganism. That in the beginning, people knew about God. They worshipped God. But after a while, they maybe that was episode 10, I'm not sure. One of those early, you'll find it if you want. People, after a while, they made a mistake. That you could worship God by worshiping His servants. That God turned over the management of the world to the stars and to the forces of nature, to the wind, to the sun, and you can serve God. You could worship God by worshiping His servants, His emissaries. Why couldn't they continue to worship God? They had a very hard time with that, because God is totally transcendent, totally unknowable, way beyond anything what anybody can relate to. What is God? The moon, okay, that's the moon. You can relate to the moon, you can worship the moon. But how do you worship God? That's like, it was too hard for them. So they thought, we worship God by worshiping the moon. We worship God by worshiping the sun. That's what they thought. And eventually, things deteriorated, and that all kinds of false prophets, and eventually they thought that these lower gods have their own powers, and eventually, the Rambam says in the beginning of Hilchos Avodah Zarah, "Nishtakach Shem HaNichvad VaNoira," the honored and holy name of God was forgotten. What does that mean? That name is the Shem Havaya. Havaya is, we don't say, it's the four-letter name of Yud and a Hey and a Vav and another Hey, the Tetragrammaton, and you cannot say that word because that is God's name. It's ineffable. We may not express that. So when we say that name, we rearrange the letters and we say Havaya, which is the same letters rearranged. And that's how, and when we refer to Him, if it says somewhere those words, those letters, then we say Havaya. But that is God's name. God has many, many names, because all those names refer to different powers of His. He's Elohim because He has power over the world. He has all kinds of different names. But His actual name is Shem Esem. What the name of Him is Havaya. So as long as the people in pagan times, in deep antiquity, as long as the people had knew God's name, so therefore they still had a tenuous connection to God. But once that name was forgotten, then he ceased to exist for them. They did not know that he existed. All they knew was that they had their gods. But the supernal God, the God who is above everything, who is the creator of everything, they totally didn't know him. No one knew him. That's what the Rambam says. So the Memtes Shari Tuma are different gradations of paganism. We go lower and lower and lower and lower. But when you reach the 49th level, then you're really at a very low level of paganism, but you still know the Shem Havaya. You still have a connection to God. You know his holy name. You know the name Havaya. If you go into the 50th level, where you forget the Shem Havaya, then it's hopeless. Then you're gone. This is the way I understand what this means. The Jewish people in Egypt, they became pagans. Because of their suffering, because of their sorrow, because of their almost despair. So they turned to the familiar gods that were around them, and they became pagan. And little by little by little, they went down to Memtes Shari Tuma. They went to the 49th gate of defilement. That's where they went. But they still knew the Shem Havaya. And they knew that this God is way beyond. And he has nothing to do with this world. He doesn't get involved in this world. He turned the world over to his ministers, to his emissaries. He himself is removed from this world. They used to worship him in the beginning because he's God, but he is effectively detached from the world. He's too high for this world. But they still knew the Shem Havaya, but he did not play a role in their lives. They didn't worship him. They didn't pray to him. They were pagans, but they knew the Shem Havaya. It was not Nishtakach Hashem Hanichvod V'Anoira from them. So now let's go back to understand what happens over here. God told Moshe, he says, go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them that I have remembered you, Pakoi Pakadati. He told him to speak to the elders. He did not tell him at this point to involve the people. He was supposed to go to the elders, tell them the code word, which they knew, and then establish his credentials, that he's not an imposter, that he's a messenger of God, and then together they would all go as a group to Paroi to tell him to release the people. Eventually, of course, they fell away because they were too scared, and Moshe ended up going by himself with Aaron. But that was what he told them to do. Go to the elders and together make a committee and go talk to Paroi and tell him to release the people. The Jewish people, the common people, had no involvement. They weren't told to storm the palace. They weren't told to do anything. They were just nothing. Just, you do this. However, and God said, B'shamul kelecha, they will listen to you. Why? Because he gave them the secret code word. So they said, Pakad Pakadati, they will listen to you. But as we continue down to the end of this quotation, he says to him that he should tell each woman to borrow from her neighbor before she goes out, before the Exodus. In other words, you people be prepared for the Exodus. You don't have to come with us to Paroi. You don't have to do anything, but you be prepared to, when time comes, to borrow things and to drain the treasures of Egypt. That's what he told them. And this was part of the Exodus process, as you see from later, that Avram, he said, Achak and Yetzum, they're going to go out, they're going to be emancipated, and they'll go out with Rechush Gadol, with great wealth. So the fulfillment of the prophecy of the Exodus required that they do this. So they also had to be taken into the plan, into the process, and told that that's what they should do. At this point, Moshe says, wait a minute. The elders, of course, will listen to me, like you said, V'shamru l'kelecha. I know that they're not pagans. I gave them the code word, and they will listen to me, of course. But you're telling me to involve the people, that I have to convince them too, that they should prepare themselves and take part of the process. There's a problem. Number one, they won't believe me. What does that mean? I'm saying a messenger of God. Who says I'm going to give them the code? They don't know the code. The code was a closely held secret of the elders. It was not common knowledge. So giving you the code does not convince them that I'm a genuine messenger of God. But then furthermore, they will not listen to me, because they will say, God, the word for God here is Havaya. Havaya has not appeared to you. What you're saying is impossible. You're saying that God spoke to you? God? Havaya? Havaya is way beyond. He doesn't speak to people. So what you're saying is total impossibility. First of all, you have no credentials. I mean, who says this? We won't believe you. Your codes mean nothing to us. And second of all, the elders say they believe you. Of course, they're trying to get us out of paganism. So of course they're going to say that. We don't believe them. So you have your codes words that prove nothing. And you're telling me a story which we believe is impossible. God does not speak to people in this world. God is too high, too far. That's what he told them. So God told him, he gave him a series of spectacular signs that he should make, some supernatural signs. And he said, you perform these 3 signs, one after the other, and then they will believe you. And God told them they will believe, they will accept the signs. This is what God told them. So if you look at the afterwards, what I'm saying to you now, I believe says very clearly, it's explicit in the Torah. After this is all happening at the Sneh, where God is telling him that you should go, he's sending him. Later, the Torah tells us that they came down to Egypt, and what did they do? Listen. And Moshe and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of Israel, of the people of Israel. And Aaron conveyed all the words God had spoken to Moshe. He told them all the words. He told them Poket Pekadati. And he performed the signs before the eyes of the people. The signs were to convince the people. The code of Poket Pekadati was to convince the elders. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again next time. I'd like to invite you to visit me at RabbiReinman.com and explore all my works, both completed and still in progress, and kindly take the opportunity to lend your support on the participant page. Thank you very much, and be well.